Hello, I'm Lewis Daniels, and this is Transplant Hub Conversations. Today I'm joined by cystic fibrosis patient and double lung transplant recipient Tina Clarke. Tina has over 20 years of experience in the health and wellness industry, specialising in people with chronic illnesses and transplants, and establishing her own company, Tina Clarke Wellness. In this video, you'll learn more about a holistic approach to wellness, and you'll learn more about the Embodying Your Transplant live class series with the World Transplant Games Federation. First of all, though, for those who aren't aware, what is a holistic approach?
Hi, Lewis. Yeah, the holistic approach is basically bringing into your awareness the mind, body, and emotions, and the spiritual as well, if that's your thing. So it's not just tackling any health condition from one aspect, just from the physical or just from the mental, but also encompassing all. That's the holistic approach, basically.
And with that in mind, what techniques or strategies have you found useful in dealing with cystic fibrosis and your lung transplant?
Okay, well, basically for me, it's been a whole adult lifetime journey into exploring and trying to find what works for me. Because up until that point, more or less, until I was about 20, I'd mainly tackled my health through just the medical system, through medications, etc. But I was still not happy. So then I had to go on this long exploration, this long journey of looking for other options that could complement and help those other parts of myself that weren't being addressed. So, for example, I found that diet and the sort of naturopathic approach helped greatly. That was my starting point. So that's all about diet and lifestyle. And then I went on to explore other therapies, massage, reflexology. I knew that movement was important. That was one aspect that in the CF medical approach, they did always encourage exercise and movement. So I did yoga and windsurfing and things like that. But yeah, it's been huge, and part of that also, I needed to look at my own emotional uh, situation, the things that I'd sort of carried with me from childhood, even that weren't necessarily related to my health issues, but they were definitely impacting my state of mind and my wellness.
So you've obviously got a vested interest in staying well, looking after your body, looking after your transplant, and making that last as long as possible. What was it that led to you establishing your own company, Tina Clarke Wellness?
Well, I've worked for many, many years, ever since my early 20s, I'm now early 40s, um, as a therapist and educator. Um, and that sort of took its own journey. I evolved over the years to include and train in various therapies and approaches. But more recently, particularly post-transplant, I felt an ever more stronger call to work with the chronic disease community and the transplant community. So that's now my speciality, and those are my main clients. And it's just because I spent so many years looking for tools that empowered myself in my health and wellness that I felt that it was only right to share that. And that was what I wanted to do, share that with others who were in difficult situations and weren't necessarily getting all their answers from the medical system.
So what are your goals for the future with your business?
Well, basically, to hopefully, because I find that this work is so new to so many people, and I think it's so beneficial, the feedback I get from clients and from groups that I work with. My goal basically is to interact with as many organizations and individuals that as I can, because I think it's really helpful. And I think that most people feel what I did, that their needs aren't really being fully met by what's being offered to them through the medical system, which is nothing wrong with the medical system, but they have their limitations, of course, like everything. And so, yeah, if I can be in collaboration with charities and platforms, it's a great way to access lots of people all over the world. and then also launch my own courses later in the year where people can directly sign up on my website.
Well, let's talk more about your collaboration with the World Transplant Games Federation in the Embodying a Transplant series. Could you explain a bit more about the principles of somatic practice and body-mind therapy, please?
Yeah, sure. So the somatic approach is all about noticing sensation in the body. And we always come to the body with a non-judgmental curiosity. So what you're effectively doing is tuning into this part of ourselves, body sensation, that has been totally ignored basically in our Western society for many generations already. And this, as we know from recent research in the last 20 or 30 years, the somatic approach and encompassing the body in our awareness is highly beneficial for processing any experience that we go through, say a major experience like transplant or chronic disease or lots of medical intervention. So, how it helps us is rather than always coming from a mind based cognitive approach, which is our tendency in the West, we also listen to the sensations and the information that our bodies are giving us, which is a fantastic way to access these essential parts of ourselves when dealing with major events like the nervous system. We know from research that we can't access the nervous system very well from a talking or cognitive approach, but we can with a somatic approach.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So why and how is a somatic approach effective in dealing with a life-altering experience, which in our case is a long-term illness and transplant?
Yeah, basically because when we go through a major experience where we are, when our bodies sense threat to our safety, which is this very primal instinct that we still carry with us even through this massive, huge evolution that we've had, um, that experience of threat of safety is held within our bodies and minds. Now, talk therapy, for example, can be partially beneficial because we can tackle this partly from a cognitive, rational thinking approach, but it cannot be dealt with fully from that approach. We need to go in via the body because the nervous system responds regardless of what our rational mind tells us. So if our body receives information or picks up senses information that we are in danger, which when we have a life-threatening illness or major surgery, then our body naturally senses that as a threat to our safety. Then that story can be held within our nervous system and even down to a cellular level. So the somatic approach deals with approaching the nervous system via sensation. And when we work in this way, we can actually unwind the stories that are held there.
You often speak about exploring our body and mind with non-judgmental curiosity. What exactly do you mean by this? There's a lot of people who might not know what you mean.
Yeah, it's a very radical approach for most people in the West. We're very used to approaching everything with the idea to fix and change. That's how we approach everything. And particularly when we've got a situation of illness or recovery from operation, of course, we want ourselves to get better. But the somatic approach is actually, rather than going in with an agenda to fix or change our sensations, we actually go in to hold space for the messages, for the information that the body is giving us. And this is like a really healing approach for most people because already, rather than trying to change something, it's always like with an agenda if you want to change something. Whereas when you hold space, you're just listening. And that is such a valuable tool when you're wanting to heal something. So I liken it to working with children. If you have a child or you work with children, you know that children, they just want to, or they need to experience what they experience and just be held in safety in a hug or with a kindful touch or words. And I liken it to that with the somatic approach. We hold the body and allow it to speak, allow it to convey its messages.
So is that a case of listening to your body and letting it do what it feels like it wants to do?
Exactly that. When you hold space for something rather than trying to change it or force it in a particular direction, the body has the intelligence to be able to potentially unwind itself, create shift itself without our cognitive minds telling it it has to.
As transplant recipients, people with long-term illnesses like ourselves, we often find ourselves in circumstances that are completely out of our control. Like, for example, when we're becoming seriously ill. Could you describe some effective techniques for us to cope with that, overcome the challenge, and still feel okay?
So just to say, first of all, yeah, of course, uncertainty is a huge aspect when dealing with chronic illness or transplant. Um, and that's really difficult for us as humans to deal with. We want to control, we want to know what our outcomes are going to be. And so this automatically can feel like a sense of threat to us because we don't know what the future holds. And when you've had an experience, like a major experience where things have been extremely challenging or difficult, then it gives us a much more pronounced feeling of uncertainty.
A lot of people watching this are going to be interested in sport and physical activity in some way as they're following the World Transplant Games Federation on social media. Why do you think it's important to move every day?
Yeah, I think it's massively important, particularly as somebody who's had a lifetime of cystic fibrosis. Movement to basically, for those of you that don't know, we create a lot of excess mucus in the body, which of course is targeting the lungs are a major part of that. So movement has always been essential to me. But particularly after transplant, I was aware as well that it needed to be done. But when you think about our evolution, we are creatures of movement. We're body-based creatures. And although in the West and in modern society, we've become much more cognitive, this is part of the somatic approach, bringing this awareness back to the body as well. Because without movement, you immediately are creating a potential situation for pain, stagnation, lack of ability to move. And when you look at certain structures in the body, like connective tissue, just as one example, um, if connective tissue is not moved, and connective tissue, by the way, runs throughout the entirety of our body, including coating all the muscles and the muscle fibers. If you don't move that regularly, which hydrates the connective tissue, you're immediately causing like this stuckness, which can cause pain and discomfort and just stiffness, stagnation in the body. So when you think about the blood, the lymphatic fluid, everything needs movement. So I really do think it's essential, and I make sure that I move every day, even if it's just to go for a walk in nature. The other days, of course, I'm doing things like yoga, depending on my energy level, maybe some barefoot running. Um, but yeah, I think as many types of movement as possible is the best.
On that topic with yoga, what would you say are the benefits of that that people may not be aware of?
Yeah, yoga is hugely beneficial because, again, it brings awareness to body. And one of the great things I loved about yoga when I was really struggling with my chronic health condition and leading up to transplant, with practices like yoga or Tai Chi, you are encouraged to sit and just be with whatever it is that you're experiencing. So, on a physical, on emotional, or a mental level, you're encouraged to sit and be with that and just allow it. So, it's very similar to the somatic approach. And it shares many qualities, and yet also the benefit of yoga is, of course, that you're moving in all sorts of different ways, and it can create a great sense of strength, and self-empowerment as well.
I think there was a prime example of that yoga was Ryan Giggs. He had a lot of injuries when he was younger. I think it was in his hamstring, and he took up yoga quite seriously and brought out a DVD on it just because that helped him so much to prolong his career. So, by the sounds of what you're saying, with that being a mindful exercise, you can combine yoga alongside your main team sport, bring them both together, prolong the other one.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think yoga, I mean, there's many more sports professionals nowadays and sports amateurs getting into things like Qigong and yoga and meditation practices, mindful movement practices. It's becoming more and more well known. And I think it's hugely beneficial in various ways. Yeah.
People may not be aware, you were diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at just 4 months, which is very young to be diagnosed with any illness. What would you say is the greatest lesson you've learned in your journey up until now?
Gosh, I have to say there's so many lessons I've learned because my personal journey has been all about trying to find my most well point and how to do that. And that meant in mind, body, and emotional perspectives. So I would say the greatest lesson I've learned is that it's never just one approach that's going to help you. When I discovered more sort of therapies, more natural complementary therapies, I always thought when I was younger, right, this is the one that's going to really make the difference. And it did, but it was never on its own. It needed to be complemented with other things. And so I think that the greatest lesson I've learned is try to gain some self-empowerment through doing your own contribution to your health and wellness. Um, it's wonderful that we have the medical system to assist us and to do the more science and technological side that nobody else can do. But I really would recommend and urge you to look for other things as well that can make you feel more self-empowered in your journey. Because with chronic disease and these serious things like facing transplant, etc., I think it's a very disempowering, potentially a disempowering process. So yeah, that would be my advice. Go and explore other options as well.
And finally, this question is very similar to the one I closed my podcast, Transplant's Take on Sport, with. But do you have any tips that you'd like to pass on to the transplant community?
Yeah, my biggest tip would be to really try to be kind to yourself. It is a huge process, and don't sort of succumb to this maybe external pressure that once you've had your transplant, you need to be just grateful, and you shouldn't really allow any other feelings, because I think that's really not helpful for you. So be kind to yourself, listen to what you need, and and hold space for that. If you need to take time with all the different feelings and sensations that you're having, then do that, and get help if you need it. Yeah.
But there you go. Thank you very much to my guest today, Tina Clarke. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. Thank you all for watching. I've been Lewis Daniels, and you've been watching Transplant Hub Conversations.